All right, so we've gotten into a little bit of an introduction to the chapter, so let's get into the nuts and bolts of skeletal muscle. That's what most of this unit is covering. It's skeletal muscle. We'll talk both about the anatomy and the physiology, so we'll start with more of the anatomy. So, and what a skeletal muscle is made of. So just remember, real quick review, that skeletal muscle is striated, it's attached to bone, and it's voluntary. So think of the muscles that, you control, the muscles you would work on at the gym. Okay, so skeletal muscle tissue, nervous tissue, blood, and connective tissue. So the big thing we talk about with skeletal muscle is all of the membranes and coverings of it. And this is something you'll see a lot of when we start dissecting cats. So the first thing is called fascia or fascia. This is just a covering that surrounds muscle. It's a really tough connective tissue, and it surrounds both muscles and bones, helps to hold them in place. Fascia will extend to form a tendon, and then those tendons are going to be within something called a tendon sheath. These are very strong, and they, again, remember, tendons attach muscles to bones. And then there's another type of tendon called an aponeurosis or aponeuroses. These are like sheet-like tendons, so do the same job. They just look a little bit different, a little bit flatter. And like I just said a moment ago, we do have tendon sheaths, which will surround a tendon, allow a tendon to slide within them. Now, when we're talking about skeletal muscle, we always talk about the divisions of the muscle. And this is really important because what we're going to see is that each division can move independently from one another. So the first one, so we're going from outside to in. So the first one we have is called the epimysium. Epimysium is on the very outside of the skeletal muscle. It's a membrane that surrounds the whole muscle. When we get into the muscle, we have this membrane called perimysium. Perimysium, it separates muscles into smaller sections, and these sections are called fascicles. Okay, a fascicle is just a big bundle of muscle fibers within the perimysium. So perimysium surrounds each fascicle. Within each bundle, so I have a bunch of skeletal muscle fibers or muscle cells within each fascicle. Each cell is separated or surrounded by an endomysium, and that endomysium surrounds each muscle fiber. This is extremely important. So just understand, before we really know a whole lot about muscles, understand that we use certain fibers at different rates. So I can contract a few of my fibers to do an easy task like hold a styrofoam cup, or contract all of my fibers to do a larger task like lift a heavy weight. And so that's why we want these different divisions of skeletal muscles. Here's a good picture so you can see the epimysium on the outside that surrounds the whole muscle. Then you go inside, you see the perimysium that separates it into sections or fascicles, and then the endomysium, which separates each muscle cell. Now, each muscle cell is called a muscle fiber, and these fibers are actually divided even more, but we'll get into that later. They're really long cells. You can see up to 40 millimeters long, which in cellular terms, that's a very long cell. They're multinucleated, have a ton of mitochondria, so think of why would we want a muscle cell to have a lot of mitochondria? Well, a lot of energy, and you guys know that, powerhouse of the cell. Around each muscle cell, we don't not only have an endomysium, but we also have a sarcolemma that surrounds each muscle fiber or muscle cell. This is the cell membrane of the muscle cell, and that surrounds the sarcoplasm. So I go back to biology. Remember that the cytoplasm is that material inside the cell which everything's floating around in. Well, in muscle cells, cytoplasm is called sarcoplasm. Then within a muscle fiber, we have myofibrils. These are thread-like, and these are the things that are what allow the muscle cell to contract. So they're called myofibrils, and they are made of thick and thin filaments. The thick filaments are made of a protein called myosin. The thin filaments are made of a protein called actin. So thick filaments myosin, thin filaments actin. And then within both of those, there's some other structures which we're going to come back to. Okay, so thick filaments myosin, thin filaments actin, and these make up each myofibril, and if I put a bunch of myofibrils together, I get a muscle fiber. Okay, the way that these fibers interact, it kind of gives this striated appearance or striped appearance of the muscle. That's why we say skeletal muscle is striated. And also remember that cardiac is striated as well. A sarcomere are these repeating units of striations. This is hard to really wrap your mind around without seeing a picture, but each sarcomere is this repeating units of these myofibrils, and each of those repeating units, again, is what's going to allow us to look like we have a striped muscle or striated muscles. So here we go. So if you look down at the bottom picture, notice that the green is the myosin, the purple little pearl-like or bead-like string of pearls are the actin filaments. And notice I have this thing called a Z-disc. We're going to talk about that in the next video. But from Z-disc to Z-disc is a sarcomere. So now these sarcomeres just keep repeating. So now if you go up to this picture up top there or in the middle of the screen, see where it's labeled as a sarcomere from blue line to blue line. So I have these repeating sarcomeres go up and down those myofibrils. But then the tiny itty-bitty actin and myosin filaments, so looking at the big picture, and we'll talk more about this in class, are those actin and myosin. We call those myofilaments. So if I'm going from the smallest to the biggest, a myofilament is going to make up, a bunch of myofilaments is going to make up a myofibril, okay? And those myofibrils together form, those myofilaments form what we call a muscle fiber or muscle cell. That muscle cell, a bunch of those together give us something called a fascicle. That fascicle, I have a bunch of fascicles within my muscle, and a group or collection of those fascicles is what makes my muscle, and that's what it's going to allow us to contract. So again, complex topic here, but we'll get more into it as we go through the unit.